but I'm compelled to address what happened just last night in our community, what we expect to happen over the next few nights, and the consequences. Last night, 200 to 300 people went to East Precinct intent on violence. The purpose was to attack the East Precinct facility and the people therein. When I say violence, I'm not talking about vandalism. I mean specifically the intent to commit violence against people. Exits were blocked. They were barricaded shut with cars and with 2x4s. Security cameras were disabled, and accelerants were used to set and grow fires. The attack was immediate, it was intentional, and it was planned. It was intended to cause serious injury or death, and it very well could have. After the events I described above, CS gas was used. CS gas was authorized by every agency involved, and its use was consistent with the threshold Governor Brown, Commissioner Hardesty, and I previously established. When you commit arson with an accelerant in an attempt to burn down a building that is occupied by people that you have intentionally trapped inside, you are not demonstrating. You are attempting to commit murder. This is not the first time that people have tried to set fire to a city building with people intentionally trapped inside. Unfortunately, it's not even the second time. And by the way, this building is in a residential neighborhood attached directly to neighborhood homes. This can't be okay. Based on the briefing I received this morning from Chief Lavelle, Superintendent Hampton, and Sheriff Reese, I believe that city staff could have died last night. I cannot and I will not tolerate that. This is not peaceful protest. This is not advocacy to advance reforms or transform any system. We are working on reform. We've taken significant actions, and there's more on the way. And I'll continue to work with my colleagues and the community and folks in the Portland Police Bureau who are all committed to reform. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen exclusively at the city level, and it doesn't happen without direct community engagement. I don't believe that Portlanders want to see public buildings burned or city employees murdered. I believe that Portlanders want to see their local, county, state, and federal representatives take bold and urgent action to reform the criminal justice system. And that is why tens of thousands of Portlanders have taken to the streets nonviolently to push for and demand those changes. And the changes are coming. The Multnomah County Sheriff, the Oregon State Police, and the Portland Police Bureau are following the guidance that we all established to de-escalate and to only engage demonstrators when there is a clear danger to people. And they're going to continue to do that. And they're going to continue to make arrests. And we will push hard and continue to ask the courts to hold people accountable who are arrested having engaged in criminal activity that put lives at danger. We anticipate additional planned attacks on occupied public buildings over the next few days. I want to put a message out to the people of this city. If you are a non-violent demonstrator and you don't want to be part of intentional violence, please stay away from these areas. Our community must say that this violence is not Portland, that these actions do not reflect our values, and these crimes are distracting from reform, not advancing it. And they're keeping our police officers from responding to historic levels of violence in our community. Right now, Portland is experiencing record gun violence. And our police bureau, its leadership, its detectives, its frontline officers, its support staff need to be focused on responding to that, not on responding to arson at our own police precincts. I'll have more information about our comprehensive plan to address this spike in violence next week, and it will involve the public, it will involve our Office of Violence Prevention, and it will involve the work that is being done at the Portland Police Bureau. I have Chief Lavelle and last night's incident commander with me today, and they can take questions so that everyone has a clear understanding of the facts. But I want to say this again. The conversation we are having right now today is not about reform. The conversation we are having today is keeping us from the important work of racial justice, equity, and comprehensive and thoughtful reform to the entirety of our criminal justice system. Thank you.
Chief Lavelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tim. As discussed by the mayor, last night's violence by rioters at our East Precinct was incomprehensible. We have people who are intentionally planning to go out and attack precincts, trap people inside, set fires to these buildings. All 3 precincts that we have here in Portland have been attacked. We've had nightly violence where officers get mortars thrown at them, rocks, commercial grade fireworks, and these senseless attempts to injure officers and destroy police facilities is irreprehensible, and it needs to stop. This is not about a movement. It's not about Black lives. It's not about racial justice. It's not about police reform. It's planned, coordinated attacks on police officers. And I feel that lives hang in the balance. When we're expending resources to go to these different arsons and attacks on the precincts, we're not able to give Portlanders the service that they need and expect. These attacks are really attacks on the community because it's depriving them of life safety services that the Portland Police Bureau needs to be able to provide. Today, I was at a community-led event and I listened to members of the Black community and family members talk about the uptick in violence and shooting and the impact it's having on that community. And we're wrestling with 2 very critical incidents going on in our community, the uptick in shootings and also these nightly planned attacks by rioters. So I'm calling on community members, elected leaders to let your voice be heard. Let people know that this needs to stop and that the Portland Police Bureau needs to get back to providing the valuable life-saving service that Portlanders expect. And I will pass it to Lieutenant Damon Simmons, Portland Fire.
Damon, you have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Am I unmuted now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thank you. My piece of this is very simple. It is critically important to me that people understand the seriousness of using fire as a weapon. It's completely unacceptable. The last fatal fire I was on, where I carried a young woman out of a house with the help of my colleagues, it was caused by someone using fire as a weapon and blocking an exit route. And so she was trapped and literally burned alive. And these things are not okay. It's not okay to do that. This is not a peaceful action. And, you know, furthermore, I would say that if you are in the area and you are looking the other way, or you're saying, hey, you know, any justification you can make, it's not accurate, it's not right, and you obviously haven't experienced someone in that state. I am 100% for the movement. I'm 100% for making things better for us as minorities, and making this city a better place. But this is not the way to get there, and hurting people and trying to trap people in buildings and burn them up it's just completely awful. And so this is my plea to you. If you are involved in this, please stop. If you are around someone who's involved in this, please ask them to stop. It can't happen like this. This is not where Portland should be. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lieutenant Simmons. Okay, we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to take just a few because, as I said, time is limited. Hard out just before 2. Reporters with questions for the panelists, please use the raised hand icon, and we'll call on you. And I'll start with, it's like Zane Sparling with the Portland Tribune. Zane, you have a question, and can you tell us who it's for?
Hi, this is Zane Sparling with the Portland Tribune. Yes, I noticed Lieutenant Simmons, police chief level, you guys were mentioning the movement, but I didn't hear you specifying what movement that was. I mean, are you talking about Black Lives Matter or something else?
I'll take that. I'm talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. So I've been out with the firefighters supporting the movement. But like I said, I do not support violence. So yeah, to be very simple, I fully support Black Lives Matter movement. I support, social justice. I support improving policing in America. I support improving the way that government works in America and making it better for minorities. But the bottom line is, this is not the way to get there. Hurting people, intentionally setting things on fire with people inside them is not the way to get there.
Okay.
Chuck, you're muted.
The calls for racial justice that we've been hearing, the calls for police reform throughout Portland, that's been a loud, powerful voice. We are supportive of that at the Portland Police Bureau. We want to see and be part of a system that has fair and just outcomes for people. But injuring police officers, burning down buildings, undertaking clear, coordinated planned attacks on people and facilities and destruction and harm to businesses is not the way to get there. We're here to protect people. We're here to save lives and protect lives. And what's been going on here is just not acceptable.
All right, thank you, Chief. Let's keep moving through the list of reporters. There are a lot of hands up. Right? Is it Gazaway from K2?
Yeah, Gazaway. Thank you so
Gazaway.
much. Both my questions are for the mayor. This morning at that community event, one of the speakers said to you and any other city leaders who believe there is not a problem with gang violence just to look at the numbers in July. So, Mr. Mayor, do you believe there is a gang violence problem here in Portland?
Yes, I do. I believe there is a gun violence problem in the city of Portland generally, and I also believe there is some gang-related gun violence in the city. All of it has the same net impact, which is in July, we saw record numbers of people in our community dying as a result of gun violence. And it's critically important that we get on that business. And we're already in the process of putting together a strategy. We're working with the community. We're working with our Office of Violence Prevention. And by the way, I will be seeking additional resources in the city budget in the fall bump for that purpose. And of course, we're going to continue to work with the men and the women in the Portland Police Bureau.
A quick follow on that. You just mentioned money. You guys cut the gun violence reduction team. I asked the police chief if he felt like there needed to be some sort of a team to address a gun violence. He says he's having those discussions with you. Do you believe there needs to be some sort of team that focuses on gun violence specifically in some capacity?
I absolutely do. And there were critical components of the GVRT that should be retained. Obviously, the investigative aspects of that, the community relationship piece is really important. And that's in part what this morning's press conference was about in terms of how do we strengthen and even expand the net of communications and coordination and support that we have with the community. And that can all be done through the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. We did not actually lay off the police officers who are engaged in those activities, and we need to talk to the police bureau about how we are going to best support the efforts around gun violence reduction within the Portland Police Bureau. I am working with the chief and others in the bureau to come up with what we believe is a workable plan that we can implement immediately.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Let's keep moving down the line. Lisa Balick, Coin TV. You have a question. Who's it for?
Yes, hi, thank you. Quick question for the mayor, just a follow-up on the GVRT. When you say it's going to happen quickly, the community members today didn't seem to be aware that there was anything that's being done. How quickly will something be in place?
Yeah, I actually wanted to have a press conference yesterday or today related to this. We weren't quite ready for prime time. Obviously, we didn't want to step on the toes of the community partners who are having their press conference today. And of course, last night's violence necessitated that I talk about this issue and focus on this issue today. But as early as next week, possibly as early as Monday, we'll be holding a press conference or some sort of a notification to the press about our plans. We're already working hard to follow up on the investigative side around the gun violence that we're already seeing. We already have community partners who are working hard to help de-escalate and reduce the tension in the community. But clearly, we need a more focused and a more comprehensive approach.
All right, thank you, Lisa, for that. And anybody have questions? Let's continue along. We want questions about last night's demonstrations as well. Everton Bailey, go ahead. Who would you like to speak with?
Thanks for taking my question. So my question, I have two questions. I'll try to make them quick. My first question is for Chief Lavelle. I was hoping you could elaborate on the people who were trapped last night in East Precinct. If you could say how many people were inside and can elaborate on the building itself. If this is a building that only has one exit or multiple exits, as well as North Precinct.
Maybe the captain can address that as well, the incident commander from last night. Chief, what do you think? You're muted.
A little bit of information about the structure of the building, and then I'll pass it to Captain Passador. But that building has a big roll-up door on one end for vehicles in a parking lot. It has a front door, and it has a side door. And those are the only egress points out of that building. Should a fire get started in that building, there are very few avenues for people to escape, which makes the events that took place last night even that much more troubling. And I'll let Captain Passador speak to exactly what the makeup was of the people inside.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I'd also like to add that when it comes to the protest from last night, that the announcement that went out to the public to attend announced this as a direct action, no cops, no prisons, total abomination. And I think that sets the tone of what last night was. And I don't want people to get confused to think that this was something related to Black Lives Matter. I've been the incident commander for 24 nights out of the 70 plus events. And I've seen amazing protesting going on in the city of Portland where people gather together. Matter of fact, there was a protest last night where people spoke on that topic at the Justice Center. And there wasn't a single police resources needed there. And there was one the night before, and not a single police resource was needed. It was peaceful. They spoke about topics and concerns that concern the community that they want the community leaders to hear. And they're making progress. And that's the way it's supposed to be. But last night, within the first 7 minutes of this group showing up at the precinct, East Precinct, they had tore off the protective boards that cover the facility because of the condition that the city is in with people displaying violent acts towards the police in the facilities. They took the boards and they put them between the handles of the door to lock the people inside. They piled those boards up against the building and they used accelerants to light it on fire. Prior to doing that, they disabled all the security cameras and they shined green lasers in the lights of officers' eyes so we couldn't see what was going on. It's really difficult to speak on this topic when you understand how truly the men and women of this city that serve as the Portland Police Bureau members, how dedicated they are to the city, and every day they keep coming back. And in that building last night was well over 20 officers. There were civilian employees, and that building directly connects to housing, townhomes, with citizens that are inside. And if that building burns, so do the townhomes that are connected to it. So last night there was well over, to answer your question, about 20 police officers stuck inside that building, as well as civilian employees, and then citizens of the city of Portland that live in the townhomes and houses.
Thank you, Captain. And if I can have one quick follow-up. As you mentioned, some of these events are announced in advance. And so I was curious if you, Captain, or Chief Lavelle, can elaborate on what the Police Bureau is doing during the daytime to try and de-escalate these the small groups that seem intent on having a different message during demonstrations.
Chief, if it would be okay, I'd like to answer something along that question. I'd like people to remember that when we started out with this months ago, we had our demonstration liaison officers that stood at a fence line in downtown Portland that separated the community from the police. And I can think of no worse example of what policing should be in a community. And then we had police officers that went out and engaged in conversation with that crowd, talking with them about concerns and issues. A lot of those police officers were minorities who've spoken publicly of their experiences and how difficult it was. And at the first part of these events, you saw that relationship building, and we, as the command staff in the Bureau, had plans to slowly move away that fence, slowly move away the barriers, keep the police officers out there, and have those good, healthy communications that we as an organization have had for years. But what happened was you started to see people who'd show up early, and they'd stand in front of the citizens who wanted to have healthy, honest conversations with police officers about their concerns. And they'd drown them out, and they'd step in front of them, and they wouldn't let them talk. And they would hijack a movement that was making progress in this community until it became a point where now, as I explained last night, 7 minutes of a well-planned, organized tactic deployed to burn down a police facility and trap people inside. It has nothing to do with the movement. And we used our demonstration liaison officers to build those relationships, and we're trying to move back into that. We had police officers out there who are the best at building those relationships. But members of a different group that are set on different goals, they disrupted that, and they disrupted it intentionally. So we're still trying to build those relationships and have opportunities to have that type of communication on the lines in those events, so we can hear what people have to say in their concerns, and we can share in a good, healthy dialogue.
Thank you, Captain Pasador. We literally have about 4 or 5 minutes left. David Douglas, NBC News, do you have one quick question you can share and tell us who you would like to address it?
Yes, I'll ask this question of the mayor. Mayor, and the previous questioner was asking a very similar question, but this has been going on in Portland now for some time, and I think it's pretty evident to anyone who's looking at these protests objectively that there are many different groups, as you all have noted, that make up these movements or protests, or in some cases actions that are leading to violence like last night. How do you bring an end to that movement? I know that's what you're pleading for, but are you connecting investigatively with the leaders of the Youth Liberation Front that issued the tweet yesterday that led to this action, et cetera? What else is going on to try to cool the temperature on some of this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it, and I'll be as succinct as possible. First of all, we have supported nonviolent demonstration in the city of Portland. It has already led to historic changes in the way we view and the way we are reimagining policing in our community. As I said, it's not going to be a quick process. This is going to take quite some time, and we're going to have to work not only with the community and my colleagues on the Portland City Council, we'll have to work with the rest of the criminal justice system, and we'll continue to be in the game for the long term on that. And I would say that the nonviolent demonstrations have been very successful in achieving their ends, which is racial justice and equity, elevating that conversation, seeking very specific reforms and investments in the community. Those are already underway here in the city of Portland. And we want to continue to work with the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. They are very eager to get off of front lines on these nightly activities, these nightly incidents where we're seeing continued violence and continued vandalism. They want to get about the work of reform, and they want to get about the work of reducing gun violence and criminal activity throughout the city of Portland. And the longer that our police officers have to stand there defending our own precinct buildings and adjacent housing, that is time that is taken away from our ability to work on the community reforms that we need to do, the trust building exercises that we need to complete in order to build that relationship with the community, and the work that we need to do to address the very real problem of gun violence. So that's the first part. The second part is holding people accountable. There's been a lot of talk, particularly in politically right-wing circles, that we have allowed criminal activity to take place, or we have willfully endorsed criminal activity. And I want to shut that down right now. That has never been true. It is not true now. We will continue to make arrests as our police officers can do so safely. And I've also asked that we step up the accountability to ensure that people who are engaged in this really serious criminal activity, including potentially attempted murder, that these individuals are apprehended, and that we work with our other partners in the criminal justice system, whether it's at the district attorney's office or the courts, to hold these individuals accountable. And so I've asked the chief to do everything they can to step up those efforts while doing so safely. And by safely, I mean safely to protect those who are not engaged in those activities, and the men and women involved in law enforcement from different agencies who've come together to help support us. And I'm grateful for that. I have two other messages. The first is to Portlanders. If you do not view yourself as wanting to be associated with or be part of the kind of criminal activity we saw last night, I would ask you not to show up. And if you do show up, say something. When there were probably a small handful of people that looked to me on the live feed who were engaged in actually trying to barricade doors, block the exit to the parking garage, pulling the wood off the side of the building, lighting it on fire, pouring gasoline or whatever it was on it repeatedly. That was a relatively small handful, but to my eye, it looked like there were a couple of hundred people just standing around, saying nothing, not intervening, and in some cases, even cheering those activities on. If you are a nonviolent demonstrator and you are demonstrating for racial justice and equity and police reform, you don't want to be part of this. You don't want to show up. And last but not least, it is actually disturbing to me that there are people who are coming from out of town, even out of state, to witness these activities. This is not a tourist opportunity. This is not a spectacle to behold. This is criminal activity. It's serious. Lives are at stake. And I'm authorizing the Portland Police Bureau and our affiliated agencies at Multnomah County and the state of Oregon to do whatever is necessary to safely hold those individuals accountable who are engaged in criminal activity and bring these nightly activities to a close. One last point I want to make, and this is a political point, so it's a little out of field. Don't think for a moment that if you are participating in this activity, that you are not being a prop for the re-election campaign of Donald Trump, because you absolutely are. You are creating the B-roll film that will be used in ads nationally to help Donald Trump during his campaign. You don't want to be part of that, then don't show up.
All right, thank you, Mayor Wheeler. Thank you, David Douglas. We're out of time. We're over time, actually. So I want to thank everybody for being here, for all the panelists that have joined us. Reporters, if you have any more